What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video we're going to be talking about Immortal X-Men number 7 by Kieran Gillen and Lucas Wernick. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down why the Progenitor's celestial judgment is testing Nightcrawler's faith and what Nightcrawler has sacrificed that forces the mutant-hating organization, Orchis, into teaming up with mutants.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
This book does a lot of really cool things with the character Nightcrawler, as each issue of Immortal X-Men up to this point has focused on a particular member of the Quiet Council and put them in a position where we learn something more about them, getting some deeper reasoning behind why they do any of the things that they do. We learned a lot about Emma Frost, her motivations behind some of the decisions and choices that she has been making, what future decisions and choices she's going to make coming up. We've seen a lot about Sebastian Shaw's past, as well as learned a lot more about the visions that Destiny has seen and what it means for the fate of her relationship with Mystique. And while there's another character that we've learned a lot about that I'll talk about here a little later on, I wanted to spend a lot of this time talking about Nightcrawler and why he's having a crisis of faith. I think crisis of faith is probably too strong a term. It's not so much that he's having a crisis of faith. He's not really doubting his faith, but he's more so doubting himself. We've actually seen this a lot over the course of Cy Spurrier's Legion of X series, where Nightcrawler has a couple of times kind of questioned whether or not he believes the things that he believes. Because as I've said before on more than a few occasions, Nightcrawler is probably one of Marvel's most openly Catholic characters, at least in terms of superheroes. Not to say there aren't other characters who aren't very religious, but of the Marvel Comics Universe superheroes, the two that usually stick out when people think of people who are just super duper ultra mega religious, they usually think of two characters, Nightcrawler and Daredevil. And in this case with Nightcrawler, because you know, we're talking about mutants here, Nightcrawler is faltering because he's thinking things he normally wouldn't want to think. The fact that all of this stuff with the Celestial Judgment, the Progenitor, all of the Judgment Day shenanigans, it's making him see the absolute worst in his fellow mutants, not just out in the world, but even among the Quiet Council. It's making him wonder whether or not they should all die, whether or not the ones who are doing terrible things amidst all this and counting their pennies and trying to obtain money, you know, pointing at Sebastian Shaw over here, in the midst of the world being judged unfavorably, being told that the world is going to cease to exist as they know it, Nightcrawler is thinking, yeah, maybe they should all die. Maybe they should all be destroyed. And not even just the mutants, he's even thinking about humanity as well, because at a certain point in this comic, he sees a flyer from Orchis, one that was used to galvanize people into protesting the mutants' treehouse base in New York. The idea that the world is literally falling into shambles and Orchis is still trying to make it all about us versus them, humans versus mutants, humans feeling persecuted by mutants being able to do things that they can't do themselves, using last year's Hellfire Gala where all of Krakoa's Omega level mutants terraformed Mars and using it as propaganda to say that, oh, they were proving that they could wipe us out any second, that even once we're done with Celestial Judgment, we'll still have to worry about what mutants could do to us tomorrow. Nightcrawler is not going to allow this to break him, and he goes through some various checks and balances in this issue to try and get to the truth, forcing Irene Adler, aka Destiny, teleporting her away from the Quiet Council and dropping her from high above the clouds at terminal velocity to galvanize her into telling him the truth about the visions that she's seen, hence why Nightcrawler went on the fool's errand that he did in Judgment Day number 5, taking Captain America to the Progenitor and having Captain America give his speech that was pretty much an act of defiance to the Progenitor that caused him to kill Captain America before the entire world, and thus all of Earth's mightiest heroes banding together to take down the Progenitor once and for all, even though it didn't even actually work. All of this was technically both Nightcrawler and Destiny's doing, and more Nightcrawler pushing Irene to tell him the truth about things. Because as we know, Irene has not been incredibly truthful about her visions as of late. She has been keeping tons of secrets, manipulating and fudging the numbers to try and get the most favorable result humanly possible that works out for her, not so much everyone else, because as we learned, I believe it was in Immortal X-Men number 3, Destiny has seen the future, and that in order for the world to carry on in a way that favors mutant kind, Mystique has to die. Right now, the timeline that Irene has Krakoa set on is one that actually is going to subvert Mr. Sinister's own plans that he's been working on behind the scenes. As we learned in Immortal X-Men number 1, Sinister has been keeping clones of Moira McTaggart, multiple clones that he has used to reset the timeline, and where he's been stuck is with Judgment Day. He's not been able to get past it, no matter how many times that he's tried, and he is currently up to 26 some odd attempts to subvert Judgment Day without anyone really knowing what he's been up to. Destiny has a rough idea of what it is he's up to. She knows what it is he's doing, but there's really nothing she can do about it to change anything, because in order for all of this to go away, Sinister would have to do it himself. And in this issue, we see Sinister actively trying to reboot everything, to kill a clone of Moira, one who still has her X gene, and using that to completely reshape the timeline, start everything back over, and then work forward with knowledge of everything that's happened before. He's not able to do it this time. Every attempt he tries to make in this issue to enact that Moira protocol, it fails spectacularly, almost as if probability has been manipulated in some way to keep him from doing so. But all the while, Sinister is trying to reboot the timeline and failing miserably at every turn, Nightcrawler has been sacrificing his sanity. Now, I say this because under normal circumstances, when mutants die and are resurrected, when they're brought back, their memories are implanted back into their newly resurrected forms. However, the thing that they lack is memory of their death. They don't use Quotey Finger's live backups as they're mentioned in this issue. The most any one mutant remembers about their death is that they were doing something and then boop, everything goes black and they come back. They don't really remember the how, the why, and the what, and they can even have their memories altered to have certain things removed. We saw this in Benjamin Percy's X-Force very early on in the series, where Domino was captured by the mutant hate group Xeno and was tortured and experimented on, and those moments left her scarred both physically and mentally, to the point that it was affecting her on a psychological level. And when she did finally die later on, she made Colossus promise to her he would not have the memories of her being tortured removed, so that she would never forget what Xeno made her suffer through. But Colossus ignored her dying wish and had those memories erased, hence why Domino has been so carefree ever since all the torture and pain and suffering she went through since X-Force number 1. Nightcrawler is doing the opposite of that. All the while this Judgment Day stuff has been going on and Nightcrawler has been ferrying mutants here, there, and everywhere else, Nightcrawler has suffered repeated deaths. He died with Captain America when Captain America faced down the Progenitor in Judgment Day number 5. He's also died multiple times throughout the course of X-Men Red, going back and forward between Krakoa and Arakko, trying to evacuate all of the Iraqi mutants that Uranos was trying to kill back in X-Men Red number 5 and Judgment Day number 1. And all of the multiple times that he has died, as we learn in Legion of X number 6, there were actually more than just the ones we've seen in Judgment Day and Immortal X-Men. Every time, he was being backed up live by Charles Xavier because he didn't want to lose any information, because he had to work with efficiency, using not just only his own teleportation powers, but using the teleportation disc of Illyana Rasputin, aka Magic. He didn't want to lose any time, and he didn't want to have to be reminded of everything that he had done up to that point, so that he could work more efficiently in evacuating all of Arakko's mutants. So every time he has died, Charles Xavier was backing him up at the exact moment of death, so when Nightcrawler's resurrected, he remembers exactly how it felt to die, something not many mutants can actually say. Probably one of the few other mutants who can actually remember the exact moment of their death is Synch, when he died in Jonathan Hickman's X-Men series when he escaped from the vault. Charles Xavier backed him up literally as he was dying, so that he could remember everything that he had seen, and that 500 some odd years of him and Wolverine and Darwin infiltrating the Children of the Vault wouldn't have gone to waste. And yet, here it is happening again, only this time, all the while that the X-Men, the Avengers, and the Eternals are working together to shut down the Progenitor before he can destroy the entirety of the world, Nightcrawler is reaching out to an enemy that really hasn't factored much into any of the Judgment Day shenanigans, and that's Orchis. Orchis has basically been working in the background. We really haven't seen much of what it is they're up to or what they're doing or how they even feel about anything. Since Moira's appearance in Judgment Day #1 and her appearance in Amazing Spider-Man #9, Moira still had Spider-Man's ex-boo thing, Mary Jane Watson, under her control, and Spider-Man and Wolverine were working feverishly to try and save her, and they did manage to do just that. And in Judgment Day #1, we saw Moira and Druig of the Eternals plotting together to try and figure out a way to destroy the most mutants humanly possible. But beyond that, we really don't see much else of Moira, and she's kind of become the de facto face of Orchis recently since Jonathan Hickman's Inferno and her subsequent being exiled from Krakoa, plus no longer being a mutant and now being more of a cyborg than anything else. Moira has been hanging out on the Orchis Forge with Nimrod, and we discover in this issue that Nightcrawler has been assaulting the Orchis Forge solo dolo. He's died at least 4 times, trying to do so, with 3 of those attempts of him trying to infiltrate the Orchis base or just outright attack it were more misdirections than anything else, because each time he was killed by Nimrod. And what he was trying to do is play on what Orchis already knows about mutants. In Jonathan Hickman's Inferno #1, it was revealed that Orchis is keenly aware that mutants know how to resurrect themselves. They just don't really know the full ins and outs of how. But what they do know is that they have had multiple different X-Men teams, typically with the same 3 to 4 to 5 mutants on them, attack Orchis base, get destroyed, and then somehow mysteriously come back, but don't really seem to be acting on any prior knowledge of the versions of themselves that attacked in the first place. This is how Director Devo and Dr. Alia Gregor have been slowly figuring out that the mutants that are coming back are technically clones. At least the bodies are cloned, their memories not so much. But the thing that's different this time versus all those other attempts that we read about in Inferno #1 that the X-Men have tried to pull off against the Orchis Forge, this one's different because once again, Nightcrawler is being backed up live by Charles Xavier. And this is actually a pretty impressive feat considering that before, the whole idea of the Orchis Forge was that it was so far away from Earth, Charles wasn't able to actually back up anybody. That's why when the X-Men died during the suicide mission in House of X #4, when they came back, they had no knowledge of whether they were successful or not. But now, Charles is actually able to keep up with Nightcrawler that far away, backing him up upon the point of death each and every time so that Nightcrawler can learn how best to take down Nimrod. And while any attempt to take down Nimrod is never going to be permanent, he does actually realize there's a way to temporarily disable him just long enough so that he can get to Moira, teleporting a part of Nimrod's cybernetic brain away from Orchis Forge so that Nimrod is temporarily shut down, and this gives him an opportunity to talk one-on-one with Moira McTaggart. And this is one of those situations where I kind of feel like it's just like anything else in life. It's like sitcom logic. All the problems and issues that are going on in a single episode of any one given sitcom could all be resolved if 2 people sat down and had a conversation. And that's kind of what's happening here, only in a more forceful fashion. Nightcrawler is bluffing Moira, telling her that the device he's placed on her head is a weapon that Forge made that will completely melt her brain and make it impossible for her to ever escape death again. Something she's already done 10 times up to this point. And that is Moira's greatest fear, is dying. She doesn't want to die. That's kind of the whole point behind why she's done a lot of the things that she's done, is because for as long as she has lived, and technically she has lived 10 separate lifetimes, all in varying stages of length, and one of them even being upwards of 1,000 years, Moira still isn't ready to check out yet. And Nightcrawler gives Moira 3 very simple choices. She can either allow Forge's device to completely melt her mind and destroy her forever, and that's debatable as to whether or not it would actually work. Nightcrawler doesn't even know, but the truth is, Moira doesn't know that. Or she can just sit here and wait for the Progenitor to destroy the Orchis Forge in a matter of moments, or Orchis and the mutants can work together to try and save the entire world. And Nightcrawler recounts Moira's response once he tells her the truth about what's going on, saying that, oh, well, why didn't you just message me in the first place? We could have avoided all of this chicanery. We could have avoided all this fighting if you would have just told me what would have happened. But the truth of the matter is, I think Moira wouldn't have listened anyway. And as Nightcrawler says, he needed her to believe that what he was saying was the truth. She needed to see it for herself. Telling her would not have fixed anything, and Nightcrawler knows that. Orchis' entire mission statement has been to wipe out mutants and preserve the existence of humanity. And mutants are just trying to live and get by. And while I do believe in Nightcrawler's heart of hearts, he knows that Moira is telling the truth when she says that the X-Men and Orchis working together is not something that will ever last. It will only be something that would persist until it is no longer needed, and then they would just go back to fighting each other as per the usual. All of that is true. Nightcrawler knows this, but Nightcrawler knows this is the one thing no one's tried yet, and it just might work. And Moira would understand this better than anyone else, because in one of her previous lives, she worked with Apocalypse because, as she even put it herself, she tried literally every other option and each of them failed. She tried working with Charles Xavier. It failed. She tried working with Magneto. That failed too. When it finally came time for her to work with Apocalypse, which is something that would seem so alien of an idea at the time, it was the only thing that made sense. And right now, that's exactly what has forced Moira's hand to convince Orchis to work together with the X-Men to stop the Progenitor once and for all, because at the end of the day, if they don't, it's not just going to be mutants who get wiped out. It's not just going to be humans who get wiped out. It's going to be both of them. And while this is something I wish would have shown up more in like a core X-Men title, not just some general Marvel crossover event, I do appreciate how it's all set up. And it makes me even more curious to see how the relationship between Orchis and Krakoa is going to work going forward after this, because I'm pretty sure it's going to just go back to the status quo. But we do know that the Fall of Mutants is coming very soon. We also know that the Sins of Sinister event is coming up in January, so a lot is going to happen, and Krakoa is going to wind up being completely undone. It's already been destroyed as of Judgment Day number 5. So right now, at best, the mutants are in a rebuilding phase, so this is just more setup to get them back to their normal status quo, because we know the Westchester Mansion is still up and around. It's overgrown with plant life right now, and the former X-Man Danger has been hanging out with her robotic X-Men family, but, you know, still just the same, they have a place to go back to if they want to go back to it. I love this because Nightcrawler, I feel like, has been through a little bit of a renaissance as of late, where he just kind of seemed rudderless since the beginning of House of X, and then, you know, finally, once we got to Way of X, he started getting his head together, even though it took him a minute to get there, and now that he's got Legion of X, he's back in the saddle again. He's back to, you know, understanding the mission, the way forward. Now he has the spark to, you know, strive towards, and he's doing it. He's actually making it a thing. And I can't wait to see what happens next with Orchis and the X-Men. Speaking of, if you want to know more about everything that happened during Jonathan Hickman's Inferno, check out this playlist right here. And if you haven't been keeping up with a.x.e. Judgment Day and you want to learn more about what's been going on prior to this, check out this playlist down here. In the meantime, let me know what you thought about Immortal X-Men number 7. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.